I'm Walter Isaacson, president of the Aspen Institute. I want to thank you all very, very much for being part of the Socrates program. As I told some of the Socrates members last night, the reason I have this job is because of the Socrates program. The Aspen Institute had this wonderful program that Gary and Laura had started, and my predecessor, who I think in a moment of a great lapse in judgment, decided it wasn't being funded properly or something complicated, tried to kill it, at which point they got rid of my predecessor, and so I got this job. So I'm eternally grateful to the Socrates program for all that it has done. There are many people to thank. Obviously, Melissa Ingber, who's put it together, and Gary and Laura. But I'm going to give a thanks to somebody I don't always thank, because when the Socrates program, we decided to revitalize it, it really did have to figure out both its mission, how it was going to work within the Institute, and how it was going to be successful. And he's not even paying attention, but I do want to thank David Gergen, somebody I've known for 30 years. And when we were shifting responsibilities around, he kept saying, but I want to keep Socrates. And he has, and he's lifted it into the great heights of today. So thank you, Elliot, as a partner and a friend of the Socrates program. The Socrates program stands for one simple thing: leadership based on values. What you do here as a member of the Socrates program is soak up the values of this world, because everybody who's a part of Socrates is already very successful. The question is, how do you move from success to significance, make a real dent in the world by believing in values? If there's one person who epitomizes the idea of leadership based on values, it's David Gergen. David, among other things, will moderate. This is not just a random introduction. He gets to moderate here. David is a trustee of the Aspen Institute. He runs the Institute of Public Leadership at the Kennedy School of Government at Harvard. He has served 4 consecutive presidents, Hayes, Garfield, Arthur, and Cleveland, I think it were. But he really has been the leader in the idea of service and leadership based on values. There's a sub-theme to the evening, not the Kennedy School, but Teach for America. I first got to truly admire David when we still do serve on the board, serve as the gentleman in waiting to Wendy Kopp on Teach for America's board. But David and I take turns handing off Wendy's latest crisis, especially when it deals with Washington. But he's been a stalwart there, a stalwart at Duke University with Bob Steele. But the whole notion of service based on values is ingrained deeply in David. Speaking of Teach for America, we've had a great core member, Rhee. She succeeded so well in Baltimore, she decided to start a spinoff called the New Teachers Project. Then she became the chancellor, is it, Michelle? I can't remember the name of it. The head of the school system in Washington, D.C., and just recently has done the most massive effort at education reform, which is basically doing something that any of us in any other organization or private enterprise would do, which is tying teacher performance to student performance and rewarding teachers based on how well they perform. She was able to do that in an ingenious way that will be the model for the rest of America. And finally, Kasim, the 59th mayor of the city of Atlanta, one of our favorite places. Kasim was, when I was back living in Atlanta, was the campaign manager for Shirley Franklin, if I remember correctly, a state senator. But now he has done something else that we truly need in this country right now, whether it be California, Illinois, or frankly, Washington, D.C., which is faced with a huge deficit, especially in unfunded pension liabilities, said, I'm going to go against all the conventional thinking and the political pressures and scale back so we can get the city of Atlanta. And somehow you got it through the city council, and I know the city council of Atlanta, and so that's an astonishing feat. But the act of bravery you did to save the city government of Atlanta is up there with Michelle Rhee's in saving the school system of Washington. It's my pleasure to invite up Kasim, Michelle, and David. Thank you.
I'm David Gergen, and I'm delighted to return to Socrates. I conducted one of the seminars about 4 or 5 years ago, and I was delighted to learn tonight that at the table for that seminar was Sam Perry, and as an auditor in another seat was Valerie Kahn, and they met there, they started talking there, and they've just gotten engaged. Where are they? Stand up. Where are they? They're here tonight. Where Valerie and Sam are here. They're back there. And Gary thought it was the first, but certainly not the last marriage that would come from Socrates. This is values-based leadership, after all. So we're very, very pleased at how this program has developed, and indeed, I want to join those who salute Walter Isaacson for his leadership of this institute. We would not be here tonight were it not for Walter Isaacson. He has done so much. I'm one of those who goes back in time with the Institute, and I never realized what someone with real inspirational leadership could do for an institution like that and like this. I think all of us who have been in and around Aspen over the years just owe an enormous debt of gratitude to him, not only for his leadership of Aspen, for his leadership of the country and of the world. He's become a really important figure for all of us. So Walter, thank you for introducing us tonight. Now, for those of us of an older generation, for those of us who go back to Garfield, in our moments of despair about where we find ourselves as a nation, one of the great hopes that we have is the generations that are coming, represented by people now in their 35 to 45 range who have been pioneers, many in social entrepreneurs who have started organizations, others who became change agents, who were devoted to changing the country, have now started new institutions, are winning political office, are beginning to offer a new way of governing and of conducting ourselves as a people. And the generation that they're inspiring just behind them, the millennials, many of whom are now in universities, and who want to go out and volunteer to work for these people because they are so drawn to them. They're magnets that offering change. I had the opportunity to accompany a group of Harvard students, graduate students, Kennedy School of Public Health, School of Education to Washington for a field trip about 2 years ago. And we ran around, we saw senators, we saw cabinet members, we saw people over at the Pentagon who were in high positions, we went to the Supreme Court, and the only time that Michelle Rhee had on her schedule was 7:30 in the morning, and we went and did that in her office. But we saw all these high-ranking people, and when our students came back to Cambridge, to a person, when they said, who would they like to be, they all said Michelle Rhee. She was the role model for people who are coming. And now we have Kasim, who has just won office in Atlanta as the new mayor of Atlanta, has just taken office. And again, very quickly, he won by just a few hundred votes. He now has a 71% approval rating, and he's already making big changes there. Both of them are here tonight, fresh from major victories for the country. Kasim just got his first budget passed, and it includes reform of pensions as well as higher pay for firemen and policemen. And it is and he can talk more about that, but it just got passed. Nobody thought that a new mayor of Atlanta can do what he has done in 6 months. They thought it would take 2 or 3 years. He's done it in 6 months. Michelle Rhee is just here tonight from a fresh and breakthrough victory on a new school contract with the unions. That Joel Klein stopped me in an airport some months ago and said, if Michelle can get this done, it will be the most revolutionary change that's occurring in K-12 education in the country. It is a breakthrough contract. And it looked for a while she might not be able to get it done. She's now here. The unions voted for it by 80 to 20.
That's correct.
80 to 20. So, So when I talk about, and now I'm going to move back off the stage and let them talk, but when I talk about the new generations that are coming, we have two of the best representatives of that generation that is just coming into real positions of power, influence, and authority, and can make a gigantic difference in this country. So we're delighted to have you both here tonight. Thank you. Mayor, help us understand what this new generation is about. You ran as part of that. You have peers around the country. Tell us who they are and tell us what you're up against and what you're doing. And then I'd like to ask Michelle about her leadership.
I really frame our leadership in terms of we're going to be the generation that has to do things that are hard. You know, when I go around the city, I talk all the time. I think of Michelle, I say we weren't around for the great wars, one or two, or we weren't able to march in the civil rights movement. But the time our cities and our country are facing right now are quite challenging. And the decisions that we're going to have to make to right this ship and put our cities and our country in a new place are just hard decisions that have come from generations of decisions. So I was sharing with you earlier, one thing I heard a stray comment. You know, it's the 50th anniversary of President Kennedy's inaugural address, and I heard a stray comment. My dad talks about that all the time, but there was a comment where the president said, we should not pray for lives of ease, rather we should pray that we are stronger men and stronger women, and I really think that's where we are generationally, because the problems that cities face right now and the schools face are just tough. And when you go to try to reform these things, you better be ready for a significant challenge. But you've got to love what you're doing right now, and I see the same thing in Michelle.
Who else do you see around the country that you see in this same reform effort about your age?
I think Cory Booker is clearly special. I think Kamala Harris.
The second one.
Kamala Harris, who's a Rodell Fellow, is the Democratic nominee for Attorney General in California, was the district attorney in San Francisco. I think Mitch Landrieu, who was just elected as the mayor in New Orleans, is going to be a true reformer, although he is older. I think everybody in the country is talking about Michelle. So, you know, it's amazing what's going on. The amount of communication you have between young leaders is unbelievable. I mean, we text one another on matters all the time. Adrian Fenty was a year behind me in law school, and he now works with Michelle.
He's the mayor of Washington, D.C.
He's the mayor of Washington, D.C. So these are people who are doing things that are hard and paying for it, paying significantly.
What difference did you see between your generational outlook and those who are older, from my generation or somewhere in between?
I think that we are much more willing to try new things. And I think that we are certainly willing to sacrifice, which is why I think that the country is making a great mistake by not asking more from us. I think when you look at where the country is, the bottom line, in order for us to do and be what we have been, certainly in the last 40 and 50 years, there's going to be a generation that has to stick its chin out and take the hit. I mean, I don't really believe that I'm going to have what people who are retiring now have, and I think it's time for us to start having an honest conversation in order to turn the tide on these hard things that we just keep kicking down the road and kicking them down the road.
What have you done that's hard so far?
You just step up. The hardest thing I've done is in the pension reform space. I campaigned on it, and once I won, I won by 714 votes. And my folks told me now that I was mayor, I could stop talking about pensions. And then I had one of America's great mayors, Mayor Daley. He said, he called me. I used to be a lawyer before I became mayor. And he said, you must really like practicing law. I said, well, I did love it, but I'm a mayor now. And he said, well, you keep moving in the direction on the pensions, you'll be practicing law again pretty soon. So the bottom line is we passed the 12-1. We changed all of the pensions and moved them back for all new employees back to the 2000 scale, because if we stayed on the path that we were on, the city of Atlanta was going to become insolvent by about 2017. And I could have kicked the can and got out of office and let that blow up on somebody else's watch. But even my closest friends told me we should wait a year, that the mood wasn't right.
How much did you reduce the pensions? How much did you change it?
We changed the retirement, the vesting schedule from 10 years up to 15. We reduced the multiplier for retirement pensions by 50%. We did every single thing that the city of Atlanta could legally do right now without legislative action from the Georgia General Assembly.
Now, you still got to, you've climbed one mountain, you got two mountains to go. You got the current employees and you got the retired employees.
I do. So the next, we're going to, the retired employees, we're not going to touch it all because I'm not going to break faith with them, and I don't want to alarm them, and they're seniors and they retired and they got a deal, and we're going to protect that deal. The second tranche is a different thing because the liability is growing so fast that the only weapon I have is to fire employees. So I want to ask the state for permission just to have a conversation, and I want to let the employees know that I'm not a monster, I'm not a hard-hearted person, but this model won't work. And just to be able to talk to the unions the way that I did the day before they came to picket me at 7 a.m. on the day that we passed our budget. 600 people showed up at City Hall prepared to picket me. And I invited everybody into my office and served everybody Coca-Cola water and all of the rest. And we sat down and we had tough negotiations. They lasted 6 hours. At the end of the day, the union leaders testified in favor of my budget because I showed them that I'm no monster, but I'm not going to let the city become insolvent. So between the city becoming insolvent in 2017 and what your needs are, let's talk about it. I'll talk about whatever you want, but I'm not going to be the person that allowed Atlanta to become a city in decline. I didn't run for office to do that. We've got to have young people, and that's why I came to Socrates today. At some point when you're leading, certainly when you run for office, there comes a moment when you're pursuing the office. You want the office, but there should be a change in you when you lead, where you think that it's not just about having the office, but using it, what you do with it. And that's what Michelle is doing. Yeah. That's why I came to see you all.
Thank you, thank you. Something tells me he knows just a bit about politics, too. He ran 2 campaigns for Shirley Franklin, did you not, before you became mayor? That's a good way to get there. It was also a good segue to Michelle. Michelle, the spotlight of everybody who cares about public education in this country, the spotlight has been on you now here for a while. Tell us about where you are in your journey.
Well, I think sort of as a segue, the most important thing that you should know about the reform effort in DC is that nothing that we've accomplished over the last 3 years would have been possible were it not for the support of our mayor, Adrian Fenty. And the reason for that is superintendents, we have no political capital. We've got nothing. So all we can count on is whether or not you can manage the school board votes or that sort of thing. I was fortunate enough to be brought into a city that has mayoral control of the schools, and so I am a direct report of the mayor, and he is the one who has given me the political cover, and he's suffered from it a little bit, in terms of his approval ratings and that sort of thing, but. When I first was approached about taking this job, I decided that I needed to be very honest with the mayor. And so in a one-on-one meeting with him, I said, "Sir, you do not want me for this job." And he said, "What do you mean? We've talked to lots of people, and you're the one. You're the one. I want you." And I said, No. I said, you are a politician. And your job is to keep the noise levels to a minimum and keep your constituents happy. I said, if I were to take this job, the kinds of things that I would have to do to turn the system around would cause you such headache because there would be such opposition to it that, you would very quickly believe that that was the biggest mistake that you had made. And he looked at me and he said, "You know what? I have no greater aspiration than to serve this city well as mayor. And I don't believe that we can have a world-class city without having excellent public school system. So whatever you have to do, whatever consternation you cause, whatever sand you kick, I'm going to be okay with it. As long as you believe that it's in the best interest of kids, I will back you 100%. And I'd never heard a politician talk like that in my entire life. And so I thought, you know what, this could be sort of a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity, all the stars aligning. And I can say that over the last 3 years, this man has not disappointed me once. He has not flinched in the face of incredible opposition. I'll give you one example. This fall in October, we faced a budget crisis, and I had to do a layoff of teachers. And I could have done it the way that every school district does it, which is last in, first out. You fire the newest teachers. But that just doesn't make sense because, you know, some of your newer teachers are actually your best teachers. They come in with a ton of enthusiasm. They really are results oriented. And so we said, we're going to do this with this reduction in force by quality instead of by seniority. And as soon as we said that, of course, you know, the crap hit the fan and everyone started freaking out in the city. And about a week into it, I was at a senior staff meeting with all of the executives in the city. And one of them said, you know, sir, saying to the mayor, we may need to pull back on this a little bit, maybe redirect a little because it's causing a lot of consternation and your election is coming up. And he looked at this gentleman and he said, we're not going to retreat. We're not going to do anything different because this is the right thing for kids and it's the right thing for the school district. He said, and if it costs me this election, so be it. We will go down in history as being the only administration in this city that had ever made the decisions based on what was in the best interest of kids. So not only are we going to not retreat, I'm going to tell you right now, don't tell me to roll back on any of this stuff again. And that's the kind of leadership that was necessary in order for us to get where we are today. And I think it is in large part what you're seeing in Mayor Rhee and what you're seeing in Mayor Booker and other people across the country is a different willingness to make the hard calls, to change some of the circumstances that have led to our school systems failing generations of kids.
Michelle, you wrote a very interesting piece in the New York Daily News just a couple of days ago, saying that in negotiating this, what you found was that the teachers' unions, which to many who've been concerned about public education reform are the obstacle or the block to getting progress. That actually Randy Weingarten had proven to be someone you could work with, and that you actually concluded that the teachers in the unions are not as much, are more in favor of reform than people think, that they have now gotten the message and they really are willing to work with someone like you as a reformer, and they supported this contract. Can you tell us a little bit about that? Because I think that was a revelation to me.
Yeah, so one thing that you should know is this contract is quite revolutionary, but it took us a really long time to get here. We negotiated it for about 2.5 years. About a year and a half ago, we thought we had it all done and wrapped up, and we rolled it out, and then the teachers union wouldn't let the teachers vote on it. So we've been through lots of ups and downs. But the interesting thing, I think, is that there is really a difference between teachers and teachers unions. And the teachers unions and the union leadership, they sort of hold on to these things that are kind of the sacred cows of unionism, right? The lockstep pay, seniority, tenure, that sort of thing. And what I was hearing when I would go out to schools and have listening sessions with teachers was that they just wanted to be treated fairly, and they wanted the process to be transparent and clear. But they weren't afraid of accountability, because a lot of the people who were most disheartened every day by ineffective teachers were effective teachers. It drove them nuts to see their colleagues down the hallway who weren't doing their job, because then they'd have to make up for that the next year. And I think there was a real, people really underestimated how many teachers we had who were saying, you know what, we're ready for a new age of accountability. If you provide us with the supports and the recognition and the rewards that we think we deserve, then we're all for this. And so despite the fact that lots of people said there's no way this is going to happen, it's going to go down, all those things, the fact that this contract passed 80% to 20%, I think, sent a message to union leaders across the country.
And did it also send a message to superintendents and chancellors that there may be ways, and to mayors and councils, there may be ways to work out reform that you haven't yet explored if you push hard enough?
I hope it did. I hope it did, because what I think we need to do is sort of break up the monotonous teacher voice that exists right now. The only teacher voice that you hear essentially is from the NEA, the AFT, and sort of they're the ones that are leading the discussion. And what we need to do is have some of the professionals who work ridiculously hard in our schools every day. I mean, they do heroic things. And they aren't afraid of accountability. They want to ensure that they are, being held responsible for what they produce for kids every day. And you never hear that in any of the debates and discussions. So one of the things that I think needs to happen, it started to happen in Denver, where a new group of teachers sort of rose up and said, you know what, we're not about the old things that the union is about. We're about raising the profession of teaching in general, and what that means is that we should identify the lowest performing people and get them out. We don't want to spend all of our dues protecting, the lowest performing 5% of us, when all of that money could go towards professionally developing the best of us. And I think that's got to happen more and more across the country in order for the sort of dominoes to start to topple.
Okay, now let me come to the tougher question, because I thought that was the biggest obstacle, and you've done an amazing job bringing that to an 80-20 vote. You still have a mayor who's now running for re-election.
Yes.
The vote comes this September. He was a classmate of yours, one year below you at Howard Law School. There are some people in Washington who now believe that your mayor will soon be practicing law again. And I'd like to talk about that because he is being challenged. His numbers are down. And I'd like to bring you into this because you know a lot about this. His numbers are down, and from my perspective, and I think it's a shared perspective, if he were to lose, and right now I think he's a bit of an underdog, if he loses this September, this all could get washed away. And so there's a lot at stake now in this mayoralty election in Washington, D.C. One of the most important reforms that's occurred in public education is just underway now. It could be blocked at the polls. I know you can't say that, I can, but can you talk a little bit about the politics, Kasim, about the politics of Washington, D.C., because you've thought about this a lot. You've gone to school there, you've lived there.
I think that the mayor's job is to clear the path and to be popular and to take the hits. And here, Mayor Fenty, who won every precinct in the city of Washington, D.C. It had never been done before. Every precinct is in jeopardy because he's made hard choices. At the exact same time, polling data on how you feel about government, how schools are performing, your experience with government are actually going up. And I think that the mayor's job at the end of the day is to clear the path for people like Michelle. And that's why I've had Adrian Fenty in Atlanta, Georgia helping, because I recognize that this race is absolutely vital,
Could we talk a little bit about the racial aspect of this?
Oh, sure.
He's ahead among white voters, and he's not doing very well right now among African-American voters.
Yeah, exactly. His numbers among African-American voters are down below 20. His numbers among white voters are very favorable. So he's got something hard to push through. I think he's going to get there because he's just going to keep making his case. And at the end of the day, I think he's going to cross the mark. But if he doesn't, reformers like Michelle don't have that person out there who's clearing the way.
So what does this say about, okay, you got a generation that's willing to come in and make the hard choices, but the resistance is pretty high out there still too.
It is, but it also says that we've got to modify the model. The model has to be, whenever we're reforming, there has to be a surge in strength and compassion at the same time.
There has to be what?
And there has to be a surge in strength in doing hard things, but you also have to have this soft part, this compassionate part.
Soft
if you want
power,
to keep,
I think Joe Knight calls it.
Yeah, you've got to keep winning. I mean, I told my COO, similar to Michelle, my COO was a partner at Bain & Company who took a 7-figure pay cut to come in and be my COO, which is why I can be at Aspen today. He is doing incredible things. He's undeniably changing Atlanta, and he's happier than he's ever been in his life, David. But my job is to make it so that when he brings in all of these Bain reports and studies on best in class, if I don't stay popular, if I'm not out making the argument, making the case, his job becomes very unpleasant. And that's where Mayor Fenty has to come, and that's where the folks in Socrates, you all need to get it. you've got two thrusts to be operating on at all times in the modern political space. The strong political thrust doing hard things, but not neglecting the part of your governance that is compassionate. So as hard as you talk about fiscal reform and pension reform, we just funded opening up every single recreation center in the city of Atlanta, opening every pool in the city of Atlanta, providing a structured environment. Because if you do just the hard things, you open yourself up to people that don't want change.
Okay, it's striking now. This is something
sorry,
Bob
David.
Steele, no, there's something Bob Steele and others in this group have thought a lot about. It's venture philanthropy. In both cases, you've had private venture philanthropists who've been willing to work with you. Now, in your case, you're opening up these recreation centers, these 12 recreation centers. You want to make them a turbocharged place for young people, but you've got a private philanthropist who's coming in to help provide the financing to make that possible. And Michelle, your contract depended heavily upon private philanthropists coming in to help.
That's right, and it provided us with significant leverage. So we raised $65 million from foundations, national foundations, to help fund this contract. And what it allowed me to do in the negotiations was, so when we started the negotiations, the economy was starting to sort of hit its low point. And what I said to the union up front was, look, we don't have any money for big raises. Right, because the union president came and said, look, I know what you want to do. I know how you feel about tenure and seniority, and I just want you to know that you are going to have to pay big time if you want to see any reform to those things. And I said, well, I don't have city dollars to sort of throw around and throw at you when police and fire and everyone else are seeing no increases whatsoever. And so what the philanthropic dollars allowed me to do is say, look, these people are lined up. They are ready to fund this contract, but only if it is the most revolutionary contract in the country. If I come back to them with something that is equivalent to what New York or Chicago already has, guess what? Those cities paid for those contracts on their own. These people are not going to pay for that. They're only going to pay for something that is groundbreaking, that is going to set a precedent for the rest of the country. And so that leverage was significant. Now, some people said, well, this is not sustainable because the next district who wants to sign the contract like yours, no tenure, no seniority, all those sorts of things, they're not going to be able to bring that money to the table. But our philosophy was, just like business, the people who roll it out first have to pay the most for it, right? And it should become cheaper every single time it happens. And so that's what our philosophy was, that as we go down the line, as more and more districts start to demand these sorts of changes in their collective bargaining agreement, that it should cost less and less. And eventually it should be about, if we want to see the kind of gains, the kind of progress that DC is seeing, then we have to have this kind of contract.
So, Kasim, you got the money for the rec center. Do you get it from one philanthropist, or is it?
No, we have a combination. Turner Broadcasting System came on board. And rather than doing a one-time gift, they're actually creating a perpetual source of revenue. So CNN, which is in Atlanta's president is a guy named Phil Kent, made it so that $1 of every CNN tour is donated to fund these, what we call Centers of Hope. We're opening all of them, 18 of them. So rather than making a one-time contribution, we're having companies come to the table so that you can have streams of income on an ongoing basis.
Yeah. This raises the question, because there are a number of people here from the business community. The partnerships that are needed with not only with the civic sector, but with the business community in order to achieve change. How are they best forged? What do you see the future there? What should we be thinking about to make those partnerships work productively for the public good?
I think the future is going to be based on earning trust, because business people like to make sure that prior to them joining you, that you're going on the right path. That's why when we talked about our recreation centers, the major funding we're getting is for the team that's going to come in to make sure we don't just create another government program. But we took significant steps to earn trust. So first of all, we took on pension reform, which suggests you're somebody that will try to do something hard. Second of all, we took on the challenges in the public safety space. Third of all, we passed a balanced budget that added $27 million to reserves. So when you're doing these things, the funding community is sitting back and seeing what they have to work with. And then once you prove, and then we brought in really talented people, competent people, and then I think you earn trust. And then what I've seen is at about the 5-month mark and the 6-month mark, they call you in for a visit, and then you have real conversations about what they can bring to the table. And they love skin in the game. So, you know, I put in $3.7 million, and I had a $40 million revenue shortfall, but I still invested to show that we had skin in the game. And I never went to see a single funder until we had done everything we could do on our own. And that changes the conversation, because then they can take your measure and have some confidence that you're serious, because people that have done so much want to make sure that they're dealing with serious people that can take a punch to the nose and will go through things to reform.
Michelle, do you see the business community as a big ally for what you're doing?
Oh, absolutely. You know, when I did that non-seniority-based layoff in the fall, while everyone was sort of yelling and screaming and picketing and that sort of thing, the people who really came right next to me and helped me out a lot was the business community. Because they said, look, you're asking this woman to run an organization in a way that is counter to every sound business principle there is. We run these Fortune 500 companies, and if we had to do a layoff, we would do it exactly the way that she wants to do it. You see who's producing and who's not, and you move out the people who aren't. If we had to do that based on who had worked here the longest and who had, I mean, it's just insane. And so the business community coming out and saying, this is what you need to do in order to have a functional organization, an organization of excellence, that was hugely, hugely helpful to us in this. And I think, you know, the other thing, because the business community, though they really wanted me to be successful, they were a little suspect about coming in too soon, because they've been in a dynamic where they'd poured a whole lot of money into the system and then it just disappeared into this black hole. And so I had to kind of, as the mayor said, sort of build some trust. And the other thing is that we needed to be very clear with them that we were willing to be held accountable for the results. Here's what we're going to produce, and if we don't produce these results for you, don't give us your money. Don't give us your support. And they had never dealt with a government agency that was willing to have those kinds of conversations. And so if you look at where the philanthropic dollars are going into our contract, they're going into the pay-for-performance system, where we are saying that teachers can make up to double what they are currently making if they are producing the highest level of student achievement for their kids in their class. And that's the sort of mentality that the business community can appreciate.
Yeah. We should take note, and then I want to go to the floor. You've actually had results in the classroom now. You've actually making progress. Especially, tell us a little bit about that.
Yeah. So one interesting thing that you should know is that when I took over the school district 3 years ago, 8% of the city's 8th graders were operating on grade level in mathematics. Wow. 8%. Wow. Which means that 92% of our young people did not have the skills and knowledge necessary to be productive members of society. Now, the interesting thing about that is that if you would have looked at the performance evaluations of the adults in the system at the same time, you would have seen that 95% of them were being rated as doing an excellent job. How can you possibly have a system where the adults are all running around thinking they are doing a great job and what they're producing for kids is 8% success? I mean, if that is not the definition of a dysfunctional organization, I don't know what is. So we have made a tremendous amount of progress over the last 3 years. In fact, in our first 2 years of running the school district, we went from having a little less than a quarter of our kids, elementary school kids, proficient in mathematics to about 50%. So it rose about 20 percentage points in a 2-year time span. And I think what that shows you is that is not about the kids. The kids will rise to the expectations that we set for them if we as the adults are doing the right things within the constructs of the system.
Terrific. I want to go to the floor to ask for questions, comments, thoughts, but I want to cold call one person, and that's Tom Friedman. And I recall, Tom, not long ago you wrote a column about how the younger generation coming up and nourishing a society, and I think you used that word, and or refreshing a society, how important it was to have generations coming out for this country. I'm just curious, as you've listened to these two, the thoughts are going through your head or any questions you might have. Please stand up if you would.
Listening to Mayor Karim, I whispered to someone at the table when you talked about doing things that are really hard, that are apolitical. Could you talk to some of the people around President Obama? Because I think that one of the things that's really struck me, is that, hey, we're here, it's Aspen. Well, we can have a real conversation, yeah. I loved your line about your generation is really going to have to do some things that are really hard because my generation and our parents have left you with just a huge mountain of problems.
And I want to get on with it.
Right, good for you. What I'm interested in is, do you think, what happens between you at the city level and what's going on at the national level? Because it seems to me something's really broken up there. And how do we take what you and Michelle are doing at the local level and do some things that are really, really hard at the national level?
Michelle and I can do our job and deliver. Government is moving in a place, in my judgment, where party and all of the rest, people are going to want you to deliver. And I think that what Michelle does by staying in her lane and the things that I am trying to do in Atlanta, opening up government to talent and merit, and having specific examples that the nation can see is me doing what I need to do. I really stay away from what they try to do in Washington because it takes up an extraordinary amount of energy and it distracts you from what you were hired to do. I was hired to make the city of Atlanta a leading city in the world. That's what I believe my charge is. I think we're the dominant city in the southeastern region of the United States. So I'm not going to be distracted by what I see and certainly what I disagree with at the national level. But every time I have an opportunity to talk about it, one, I'm going to deliver results that nobody can argue with. There's a book by Michael Barber that I read here while I was here as a Rodell Fellow, and it was called Instruction to Deliver. It's a very good book about Tony Blair's first 8 years in government. And the theory of the book is this: if you don't take care of the basics and do the basics very well, you don't get to do the special stuff, Tom. So in order for me to go and help kids and all of the rest, if I don't fix potholes, pick up trash on time, have your phone calls returned for 911 phone calls, you won't believe that I can do anything transformational because I can't even pick up your trash. And I think the government, I believe that is a problem that we're having at the national level. Folks don't see government doing things that are directly relevant to them, so they're starting to look at government like it's a bill.
Like it's a what?
Like it's a bill, just another bill that you get. And when people start feeling that way about government, we're in a challenging place. And I really believe the Socrates Society, the people in this room, we need to acknowledge the fact that in order to assure this country's position globally, there are going to be a series of very hard things we're going to have to do, especially as it relates to the debt space. And Michelle and I can be a specific example in our cities. The pension challenge in the United States is a national challenge, and the bill is getting ready to come due. By doing the things that I'm doing in the city of Atlanta, and hopefully if I'm able to survive it, then we will have some specific examples where you can go to other mayors and governors and show what we did and that we survived it. But you can't underestimate the importance of elected officials doing everything that is necessary to maintain the political will. Otherwise, reformers don't get to reform. So it's not a one-for. It's real easy to talk tough and do all of the rest. You've got to have a two-for and a three-for. You've actually got to do hard things and then create the political will to survive it. I tell my CEOs all the time, I've got a group called the Atlanta Committee for Progress. And when you become a mayor, you get in these rooms and you start thinking you're a CEO. Well, you're not a CEO of a company. You're a mayor of a city. And I tell them, we're going to do tough things, but I've got to maintain the political will because I'm no good to you at 40%.
Yeah.
I'm no good to the Aspen Institute or anybody else at 40%. I'm good at maybe 55, 57, 58. I'm a miracle worker at 60 and 70, right? Because then we can make the arguments and we can go and we can come up with ideas and initiatives here, and then we can implement them and push them through. And when you do that, we've got to change this conversation, and we've got to start telling our peers that you should find nobility in this challenge that we're getting ready to take on as it relates to altering this debt picture.
Yeah. Where's the mic? Yeah. Please, there's a question here. Where's the microphone? And I want to get Mickey Edwards to come down here before we get through this. Please.
I'm just curious if you think the business community would be so behind you if you weren't simultaneously also busting unions?
Oh, no. Michelle, you can take that one.
Repeat the question, so I'm not sure everybody heard it.
Well, I'm just, you talk about how the business community and the private sector is behind these reforms.
No.
But a big part of these reforms has been challenging unions. Would you have their support without that?
So,
No.
first of all, I want to clarify with something because I have been sort of cast as the anti-union, union busting, all this sort of thing. I just want to make something clear. If you look at collective bargaining agreements, the collective bargaining agreements that dictate in public school districts across the country how schools are staffed and that sort of thing, they are flawed. They are faulty. And because I'm going to challenge the union on that and I'm going to push them to make changes, that doesn't mean I'm anti-union. I like to say that I'm pro-kid, okay? And there's a big difference between those two things because my end game is not to obliterate the union or anything like that. I don't believe that the unions are the biggest, all that sort of thing. But what I am is I'm not going to allow anything to happen or for policies to continue to operate in our district that are looking out for the priorities and privileges and interests of adults over what is in the best interest of children. And that's a very important distinction to make. And I think that's the one that the business community sort of appreciates is your bottom line is kids and student achievement, not profits like it is in the business community, but you're going to hold people accountable, you're going to stick to that bottom line, and I think that's what they appreciate.
Did you have a response to that?
No, I think that's
You got her microphone. Let her give her the microphone.
I think that's wonderful. I also think the business community has an interest in unions taking a hit. And I'm wondering if you can speak to that.
Yeah, my deal's a little different. First of all, I wouldn't be mayor without the support of unions. And in the reform we implemented, when the unions came to protest me, we met for 6 hours. I just didn't get up and say, I'm not going to do anything you said. Second of all, I did not win with significant business support. So I don't come to the table that way. But what I will share with you is that I'm also not a sore winner. And I understand that for Atlanta to be what it has to be, we need a thriving and vibrant business community that has an excellent relationship with the mayor. I mean, what I'm talking about really is a third way. The conversations that you have to have.
We've heard that before.
No.
Okay.
The conversations that you have to have with labor are real conversations. And I'll just be honest with you. Mine are around, I can prove with absolute certainty to my closest union friends that the city of Atlanta becomes insolvent at 2017. And then I said, let me tell you why that's bad for you, Aspen. If the city of Atlanta can't meet its pension obligations, two things happen. One, the first thing is that the state will no longer provide us with our sales tax, so they retain the sales tax. That's step one. The second thing is that they abolished the charter of the city, which makes all of the union contracts invalid. So it doesn't help you for the city to become insolvent. In fact, that's the way that I get out of your contracts. So by trying to create a model that's fiscally sustainable, I'm keeping the contracts valid. So it's in your interest to help me build a model that works for 10 and 20 and 30 years. Because if you get the wrong mayor in here, they would use the tool of insolvency to invalidate all of the contracts, including for the folks who are already at home. So I'm your guy. You might be mad at me today, but I still represent the best hope. At the end of the day, both unions testified in favor of my budget. But I don't want to give you the impression that I did a macho man. I worked at it because, like I said before, at 45 and 50%, what good am I to the city of Atlanta? Because you can't shape the public debate, you can't shape the public will.
It's interesting. And Laura and Gary, I think the same thing happened in California. The unions have been willing to come and negotiate in a spirit that I think was far better than many people assumed was possible. Yeah, please.
You both are so extraordinarily inspirational. All of the Socrates folks here, absolutely, would love to give back to their communities the way you have so inspirationally. But running for public office just ain't in the cards for us. It is a disaster. It is so hard. It destroys your personal life. And both of you are in public life. Tell us about that. Tell us about the sacrifices that you made. Michelle, I know you're engaged. It's wonderful. That's fantastic. Cory Booker's still single, and Kamala Harris is still single. I mean, it's really, really hard to be in public life. So can you talk to that aspect of being a public servant?
Well, maybe we should fix Kamala up with Cory. That seems to work for Kevin and I. My fiance is the mayor of Sacramento. I have a lot of mayors in my life. My fiance is a mayor. My boss is a mayor. And I actually, think that in many ways it's what makes our relationship work, because we realize how difficult the other person's life is. We help each other through that. I'd say that the toughest thing for me is with my kids. I have two small children, so I have an 11-year-old and an 8-year-old. And they attend DC public schools. So I think that actually provides me with a very valuable perspective, because I'm not just sort of at the top of the school district running it and making policy, but then I actually live it every day when the stuff comes home in the book bags and it makes no sense whatsoever, and then I can take it into the office the next day and go, what is this crap? I can't even understand it. How are you going to expect any other parent to understand it? Fix it. So, and I think that sort of, being in the public lights does certainly take its toll. But I was raised to have a really tough skin. And I think that is one of the things that has really, helped me through the last 3 years, is that, if you're too focused on kind of being liked and being popular and that sort of thing, I think that actually can be detrimental at times as well.
Well, let me say, is there a difference between the two of you on this popularity question? You've been saying, if you're at 45 to 50, I can't do what I need to do in the city of Atlanta. You're saying, I don't care about this popularity stuff, just get it done.
We have two lanes.
Yeah,
I'm a
it could
blocker
be,
for
right.
her.
What's that?
My job is to clear the lane for what Michelle does, because Michelle can't survive if I don't get reelected. So Peter Amon in Atlanta, who's my COO, who implemented all of the reforms that we implemented, would never have the opportunity to run a major American city after being at Bain for 20 years. But if you talk to him, he's happier than he's ever been in his life, because he's doing something where he sees the results. But you implement the things that we've implemented, We took out $30 to $40 million in cost and all of the rest. We were facing a $48 million budget shortfall. So all of the things that he was able to apply in terms of expertise, you try to do that without the appropriate political will and see without somebody to go out there and make the argument and to fight those fights and to be willing to do it.
To go back to Laura's question, how much of an invasion of your privacy, a sacrifice of personal life did you find?
Oh, it's transformational. I had a shaved ice today in town, and nobody said anything to me, you know. And it was just the coolest thing. My life has completely changed. But this is what I think the deal is. You're all about public service. Pick your lane. Either determine that you're going to be the person that presses the button, or you're going to be the person that influences the person to press the button and then become very good at it. If you're going to decide to be the person, if you want your own button, if you want to be the decision maker, fall in love with all of it or just stay out of it. If you don't love the whole process of this deal, then you really should probably be on the sidelines at a high level. If you want to complain about fundraising, if you want to complain about the number of talks, if you want to complain about a 60, 70, or 80-hour week schedule, you're in the wrong business. Go do something else. You got to love this. It's a blessing. You are given a period of time. I don't know how long I'm going to do this deal, but you're given a period of time. And you should, I say, in my office, I say we run the West Coast offense. I'm going to throw the ball until the last minute of the last day of the last hour. And I think that that's what you do. So my campaign was awful. It was brutal. People come up nostalgic about my campaign. I spent 2 years of my life. I was polling third for my entire campaign for 2 years until the last 45 days, and then I won. So it was awful. And people want to be nostalgic about it. It was awful. But the point is, I knew the deal when I got in the race. I had run 2 mayoral campaigns. I was not a doe in the headlights. You need, in this place, politics is so hard, so brutal, so intense, so personal. If you really don't want to do it, there's another lane. And that's where you pick someone, you get involved with them in a serious way, and you help them become excellent and special and help them implement a greater vision, because both lanes are needed. But if you want to talk about my personal life, I have never been happier in my entire life than I am right now. I wake up every morning at 5 o'clock, my eyes open up on their own, thinking about what I'm going to do.
What is your personal situation? Are you married?
I'm single.
You're single?
No, please don't say single. I've got a great lady that I've been dating for 2 years. I got to do right by her, though. She's going to leave me. Man, I almost slipped up and said I'm single, and she would have Googled this, and that would have been the end of it. Wow.
Okay, let's go here, please. Where's the microphone? I can't, if there are hands in the back, I can't quite see. There's another hand back here. We move another microphone back here, the second microphone, back over here. Please.
This question is for Michelle. Michelle, if you
Please speak up so everybody can hear.
If you compare the U.S. school systems, for all the infrastructure, for all the assets that are available, the performance is abysmal. What's going wrong? If you were comparing to the developing countries, etc., what's the thing that should be the struggle here?
Yeah, that's a great question. So basically what he said is, if you look at our infrastructure, the amount of resources that we put into education compared to developing countries, et cetera, we're just doing a terrible job what's going on. Let me just give you one statistic that I think can illuminate a lot for you. There's an economist by the name of Eric Hanyashek, and he just recently came out with a statistic that showed that if we in this country removed the bottom 6 to 10% of teachers, so the 6 to 10% of the lowest performing teachers in the country, and we replace them not with the best, but just with an average teacher, we would move from the bottom, where we are now, which is 21st, 25th, and 29th across the globe in reading, math, and science, to the top, to up where Finland is, if we were to take that one action. Now, if anyone, I know all of you are
Wait. Let's walk through that just a little more slowly. you're not saying you take out 8 to 10% of the workforce and change them into average teachers, and the performance rate of students in this country would go up to number 1 in the world. You're not saying that.
Not number 1, but he said up in the top 5. Now, let me just say that for all of you business people,
Do you believe that?
If somebody, yes, I absolutely do. If someone were to tell you as a business, if you remove the bottom 6 to 10% of your performers and you will move from 25th in the market to in the top 5, you would do it in a heartbeat. You would not even think twice about it. But we have this incredibly difficult time in this country with the thought, because we like teachers, we respect them. It is an incredibly noble position, but we have to look at the reality. And though we have thousands and thousands and thousands of amazing teachers in this country, we are not doing right by them as professionals to continue to allow the worst performers to teach kids every single day. And so I actually do believe that it is true. Now, if you look at where the bottom 6 to 10% of those teachers are concentrated, you'll probably see that they are concentrated in urban cities, the ones that are doing the worst. And so, you would have a differential impact. But I think that statistic is an incredibly important one for us all to consider as we think about, because people say, well, it's impossible to fix the public education system in this country. That seems like a very easy thing for us to begin to tackle.
Let me ask you this. If you look at our highest performing public schools, and our highest, including charter schools, if you take the 5 or 10 across the country, do the student performances there put them in the top 5 in the world in terms of level of performance?
So, one of the things that's interesting to look at is schools like KIPP.
Right.
So KIPP is a charter school that they operate in urban districts across the country. They serve a population of children that is, like what I serve, so low income, mostly minority kids. And if you look at what is happening there, they are not just making sure that their kids are outperforming their African American and Latino poor peers in other parts of the country. Their kids are now outperforming the suburban white affluent kids in this country. So I actually think that that's one data point of what can be done. But if you look sort of across the country, I mean, even in some of the suburbs, and I think this is one of the things that people aren't realizing so much, is that even in a lot of our suburban schools, we are still not producing the kind of talent that we are, that's being produced right now in China, India, and all across the globe.
Yeah. There's a question back here.
Yeah, hi. It's kind of a follow-up to Tom's question. If you believed in the Republican vision, it was clear 20 months ago in the election that people felt really disappointed with whether or not they'd executed. 18 months into the new administration, there's a lot of feeling around the country that you're disappointed that the new Obama administration isn't really living up to the expectation that the people who had voted for it felt that they were going to get. The two of you represent a level of leadership in public service that is so rare. Those of us who had a chance through Socrates to study politics in the country get a sense that politicians increasingly really aren't leaders. They kind of have to follow. They kind of do the minimum that they can do or what the polls tell them they can do. The two of you are perfect examples of actually stepping out and really showing leadership. Can you describe what it is about the system that makes it so difficult for so many of us, whether you believed in one vision or the other vision? We're so disappointed because it doesn't seem like politicians can lead, and the two of you are perfect examples of what can be done if there's real leadership, and why is it that so few politicians take that track?
I think that has to do with the people that are winning elections, and that's why what we're doing here is important. The person that wins matter. Tom said something a little while ago that it really struck me. He said, I didn't elect a politician. He was talking about the president. He said, I didn't elect a politician to read a poll. I elected a politician to change the polls. And I remember that. That was a striking comment for me. I think we've got to spend more time getting the people elected who are willing to do these things. I mean, who wins? I mean, what we certainly know, even though the president has his challenges, who wins elections matter. And we need to spend a lot more time in our country determining who are going to be the individuals that hold these offices, and we need to spend a lot more time making sure that they're the right individuals for it. And organizations and groups like this need to do it, because I'm telling you, we don't have any mulligans anymore. We're in a very tight space from a national and a global competitive position. We do not have 4 and 8 and 10 years to play around. So that's why we've got to, when we decide, when we're looking at these high offices, we've got to get the right person in there.
So how soon are you going to run?
Oh, I'm running. I got the best job in the country.
I just want to say one thing, because I think this is an important point, and this is something that I've learned about politics. This is hard because, and I'll give you an example. There's a columnist at the Washington Post who wrote a piece on me not too long ago, and he said, I like Michelle Rhee. She has done more for this district than has been accomplished in a long time. She's doing the right thing. She's making the hard. I just wish she would be a little nicer. And so I, of course, called him after the piece ran, and I said, you need to sort of figure out what you believe the most important characteristics of a school chancellor are. And if you think that sort of being nice and getting along with people is the sort of top thing, then you should be advocating for my ouster. But if you think that I'm doing the right things, then you should be taking a different stance. And he said, you don't understand. He said, I want you to stay. And I'm terrified that if you continue to do the things that you're doing and to be as unpopular as you are, that you're not going to be able to stay around much longer. So, if you could be just a little nicer. And what I'm saying to him is, if you want warm and fuzzy, I am not your girl. And what he's saying is, if you were a little warm and fuzzier, you could stay around longer. And this is the constant struggle that we face, is that people were saying, you're doing such good things. Don't you want to do them for a longer period of time? And the way that you're going to buy yourself more time is to dial it back a little. So there is this inherent tension in this. And my thing has been, look, I've seen superintendents in cities across the country come and go, and a lot of them sort of have this ideal that I want to stay for a long time, I want to stay for 10 years, because that's how long it takes, and I believe that too. But if you are accommodating everybody along the way, then you can't actually implement a lot of the things that are going to make the transformational change happen. And on the other side, if you because change is not easy. People don't like change. As much as they say they want it, they don't want it. And so that is the dynamic that I think so many, and I don't have to become elected again. Only my boss has to become elected again. But I think that's the tension that so many elected officials feel, is this sort of tension between going all out, doing the things that you need to do, being sort of that leader, but knowing that in the long run that may cost you your ability to continue to do that work.
Yeah. Is there a microphone right? Nikki Edwards, who runs Rodale, you must be, who's been the elected politician, but really you've got your one of your star alumni here. I'm just curious where you are on this conversation.
Well, yeah, first of all, Dave, you're doing a great job doing that, and I want to tell you that I told Laura that I'm truly impressed and motivated by hearing Michelle and Kasim. Just terrific job, and I want to say I was pleased when Kasim was talking about the fact that he and other leaders remain in contact with each other, because there are, in the Rodale program, we have the mayor of Baltimore, we have the city council president of Los Angeles, we have the city council president of Louisville. There are more people like this, but here I want to go to a slightly different place than Laura's question, which was about the personal price of political leadership. What concerns me, David and I taught together at Harvard, taught other.
Use all of the tools that are available to them to connect with them. Your schedule shows what you care about. I mean, the other day I was giving a speech to a group of young people in a park in Atlanta. And Chris Tucker and I were meeting that day. He's an actor in this in the movie with Jackie Chan, the Rush Hour movies. And those kids weren't quite listening to me. They were it was hot, it was Atlanta. They were like, this mayor dude, like, what's he doing? And Chris and I were meeting. I told Chris, instead of meeting me at my office, to come to the stadium. And he came and he gave a speech that was almost as good as I gave. But you know, those kids saw him, but they knew what the mayor did. He gave me 10 more, 12 more minutes, 15 minutes of your time. You have to change the game. You can't believe, I'm a public school kid from Atlanta. You can't believe or be confined by how kids should get it. You just have to want them to get it. So we always have to be changing, Mickey, and I think that what we do is we want to communicate with young people in the way that we want them to communicate with them. We want them to get it the way that we think they should get it, and if they don't, we get frustrated and we move another way as opposed to staying at it. And I think that as it relates to our young people, we've got to stay at it, or we're going to be promoting, you know, a generation of young people who don't have a shot. You know, the reason what Michelle is doing is so profound is when I talk to my business folks and I'm asking them about helping me and all of the rest, the bottom line is I tell them you can't have a 40% dropout rate in the city of Atlanta and believe we're building a great city. You're just unleashing 40% of your young people into your cities and communities, and you're going to see them. We're either going to build boys and girls or men, women and men. What do you want to do? Now, let's get the best and the brightest to figure out how. But I really think, Mickey, you've really got to be creative, especially in the urban environment. How you going to reach a black male? How you going to reach a Latino male? We are in a place, in the conversation I'm having, and I'll be interested to get Michelle's thoughts, the United States can no longer afford to have any weak links in the chain. Can't afford it. You can't have any population in the country that's not pulling its own weight and contributing. And I tell kids that, and you should see their faces. Like, I'm telling you, it's not okay for you to be a loser. No, really, I mean, when you have it is a different conversation that has to be had. We need to be telling kids that your outcome, it used to, you know, matter to a couple of people, but now your outcome matters to the city, the state, and the country. And you being a loser and going to jail has implications that are unacceptable now. And I know that this might seem kind of crazy, but I think that they're getting it. I really do.
Mickey, if you could stand back up. Can I ask you to address the disconnect that Tom Friedman first started talking about? We've heard it about a couple times tonight. When you see these reformers at the local level who are as inspiring as these two are, why is it that we have a dysfunctional national political system?
Can I use two words?
Yes.
Political parties. We're being killed by partisan poison. Neither Kasim nor Michelle talk. All this great talk never mentioned Democrat or Republican. Never talked about how, you know, it's our team against their team. And in Washington, that's all it is. It's all the Democrats on one side, all the Republicans on the other side. That's the way it is in the state legislatures. And we've got to get past that and be a country, not two private clubs fighting for power all the time. I think that's the main dysfunction we have in our system.
Did you run as a Democrat? Kasim, did you run as a Democrat, or did you run?
I'm a Democrat. The Atlanta mayor's race is nonpartisan, but my first day, in my first week, the Republican governor, the lieutenant governor, and Republican speaker had me as their guest in the Georgia House and the Georgia Senate, which is the first time that had been done in Atlanta in more than a decade. We just passed the most significant transportation reform in the history of the state of Georgia. And when the governor signed the bill, he did something that would have been political suicide about 10 years ago. The governor, the speaker, and the lieutenant governor acknowledged that the transportation bill wouldn't have been passed without my help, and had the mayor of the city of Atlanta standing shoulder to shoulder with him. That hadn't happened in Atlanta and Georgia. So we're trying.
Okay, we are running at about,
This is for you.
5 more minutes? 5 more minutes to it? Joe Nye.
Like all your audience tonight, we've been enormously impressed by the new generation of leadership you represent. But Michelle, I want to pick up a point that you made about hard and soft, because it came up in our Socrates seminar this morning on power in the 21st century. One of the women participants, who I would describe as a successful young lawyer, said, you know, power is very difficult in relation to gender. And I wanted to ask you that question. She said, as a woman, I find it much harder to know how to use power. If I'm too soft, I'm stereotyped. If I'm too hard, I'm cast against type and discriminated against for that. You were talking about your tough skin and how to be tough, and that's important. But how do you deal with gender? Does it play a role at all? And how do you work with the common problems that this woman described in our seminar this morning?
You know, I'll say that there are certainly lots of times in my job where I know that race and gender are playing their parts in my sort of leadership. You know, I strongly believe that if I was a 55-year-old white guy doing the same things, that it wouldn't nearly get the kind of, you know, media play that it does. It's because when I was, you know, appointed to this position, I was a 37-year-old Korean girl from Toledo, Ohio, who had never run a school, much less a school district. So I was the diametric opposite of what people both wanted and expected in a school's chancellor. And, you know, you read newspaper articles or magazine articles about me, and they say, you know, in her slim black pants and her you know, black patent leather shoes clicking across the floor, she walked from here to here. And I was saying, when's the last time you heard about what suit Obama was wearing or what his shoes looked like, right? I mean, there's that part of it, which I think definitely plays into it. I think people sort of, you know, cast me as this, she's the dragon lady, she's this sort of thing, and I think that's a gender piece that's playing into it. But I also think that it plays to my advantage. I mean, I think that the greatest strength that I have is I know how to sniff out talent, and I'm not afraid to hire people who are a whole lot smarter than I am. And I'm not afraid to tell everybody that that's what I do too. All of these people around me are a whole lot smarter than I am. And all I want to do is just sort of knock the obstacles out of their way so they can do their job. And I think that because of the environment that we've created in the school district of saying, you know, this is not just one person who's sort of running, but we're building this, you know, team. And the management style that I have and how I think we operate every day has, I think, built an incredibly strong institution. It's not just about one person.
It's interesting. I wonder if I could ask, is there a microphone floating around in the middle of the room nearby? Neil Ferguson. I asked our historian, who's also a moderator for one of these Socrates seminars this week, as you've listened to this, you've thought a lot about potential American decline. And so how has this conversation struck you about this coming generation?
Well, I think it's been an extraordinarily inspiring evening. I just wish you two could run for the presidency. I'm trying to work out who should be first on the ticket and who should be second.
Michelle.
But it's extraordinarily inspiring to hear such courageous talk, and particularly for somebody who works in education, for you, Michelle, to acknowledge that quality is the key to success in teaching. It's also partly, of course, about the structure of educational institutions. And it's no coincidence that the United States has the best universities in the world. That's one reason that I work in this country now. Because the structure of governance of American universities is completely different from the structure of governance of universities in Europe. The existence of a strong private sector in higher education is really the key difference between higher education and high school education. And I'd love to get your thoughts, Michelle, on whether there could be a bigger role for private institutions at the high school level to put some competitive pressure on the public school monopoly, which seems to me to be part of the problem you're dealing with. The other issue which I'd like to throw out is prompted by Kasim's excellent comments on battling the deficit. You know, it seems to me, Kasim, that what you're doing is fighting the fiscal crisis that is inevitably creeping towards the federal government. Hasn't got there yet, but it's on its way. You're having to take the tough decisions that they can kick down the road a little further in Washington. It's not just partisan.
I can't print money in Atlanta.
Right, you can't print money. And that's the real reason that these issues are not being addressed, going to Tom Friedman's point. They've got that little bit breathing space. I don't know how much longer it's going to last, but when that breathing space runs out, we're going to need someone like you in Washington as well as in Atlanta. So I congratulate you both.
Closing comments.
So I'll just address that. I think that competition is key. Really one of the only reasons why the mayor was able to take over mayoral control of the school district was because we have an incredibly vibrant charter sector in DC. In fact, 40% of the school-age children in Washington, DC are enrolled in charter schools. And it was that reason, right? Even people who didn't really want to change that much looked up and said, oh my gosh, if we don't do something about the traditional public school district in this city, in 10 years we aren't going to have a DC public school system. They're all just going to be charter schools. So that's what gave the mayor the leverage to take over control of the schools, and that's what's given us a lot of leverage for this aggressive change as well. And I think that the choice dynamic that we've created in DC, where we have a vibrant charter sector, we also have a few thousand kids who are on vouchers, federally funded vouchers to go to private schools, it is all incredibly healthy. Because what it allows is something that's never happened before, which is low-income people who would normally be trapped in their failing neighborhood school now have the option to do a variety of things. And that's why, not to bring the partisan piece into it, but I am a Democrat, and people always say, well, how do you support the voucher program? You're a Democrat and you're a school district superintendent. That's crazy because they're taking away all of your kids and they're sucking the money away. And I say, that's not how I think about things. I believe that part of my job is to make sure that every single child in Washington, D.C. gets a great education. Whether that happens at a parochial school, a charter school, or in a DCPS school, it makes no difference to me, as long as they're in an excellent school. And if a kid in Anacostia and their family, where they have a failing school, neighborhood school, can take a $7,500 voucher, and if they can get a partial scholarship and go to Sidwell Friends or somewhere like that, who am I to stop that kid from having that reality? And so I actually think that the competition that has been created and that choice dynamic that's being created in DC is part of what has leveraged the change and what has allowed us to get better as a public institution.
Final words, Kasim.
I just want everybody to remember that let's decide that we're going to do the hard things, and that this notion of United States' decline will not stand while we're around, and that we're going to force, in whatever capacity we're in, wherever we are, that we're not going to allow this to happen, that we're going to have 4 or 6 or 8 or 10 years, and let that be the contribution of our generation. We didn't have these other challenges that laid the foundation so that I could be sitting here on this stage or Michelle could be sitting where she is. But I believe that we can change the conversation, and we need to go ahead and get on with it and let people know that we're prepared to make hard decisions and enter the political fray so that we can sacrifice to prevent the decline of the greatest country on the planet Earth. That's what I think.
Ladies and gentlemen, Gary, did you want to? Yeah. Okay, fine. I do want to say on behalf of Walter Isaacson and Gary and Linda and others here, the Socrates or Odell programs, I want to tell both of you just how grateful that we are to you, that you've been willing to enter public life and bring to it the strength of conviction and the kind of commitment you have to this country and to quality. And we're deeply honored that you're here. Thank you.
Thank you, David. Thank you all.